Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States. More than one term of office, 1861 to 1865. Republican Party. Known as Honest Abe and the Great Emancipator. Born February 12, 1809 in Kentucky. Died at age 56, April 15, 1865, in Washington, D.C. War is a terrible thing. Still, many historians believe the war between the states was a necessary war for the United States. It was a test to see if the group of territories and states could coexist as a single, unified nation. Perhaps by fate, Abraham Lincoln turned out to be the right president to preserve the country in its most difficult time. The story is often told of Abe's birth in a Kentucky log cabin in 1809. He was self-taught, working hard to read well and learn math. In his early 20s, Lincoln moved to the town of New Salem in Illinois. He was an awkward young man. Very tall at 6'4", Abe earned a reputation for wrestling. Gifted with great strength, he could chop down trees and quickly split them into rails with ease. As a clerk in the New Salem General Store, he was known and liked by almost everyone. Soon he became the town's postmaster as well. Lincoln studied law on his own. He earned his license to practice law in 1837. As a member of the Whig Party, he was elected to the Illinois House in the mid-1830s. At the time, he disagreed with slavery, but he also did not support the idea of citizenship for blacks in America. Abe wed Mary Todd in 1842. They had 4 sons. 3 died before reaching adulthood. In 1846, Lincoln was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Almost immediately, he opposed President Polk's decision to go to war with Mexico. In a bold congressional speech, Abe condemned Polk for launching bloody battles over territorial borders. In a few years, Lincoln returned to his law practice in Illinois. He left the Whigs, joining the Republican Party in 1856. 2 years later, he was the party's candidate for the U.S. Senate. Across the next few months, Lincoln would engage in several debates with his Democratic foe, Stephen Douglas. In their meeting of June 16, 1858, Lincoln delivered a stirring speech, one of the most important in American history. He spoke of the country's continued arguments over the issue of slavery. Drawing from the Bible, Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Put simply, he believed that a country with half free states and half slave states would not last. It would have to be all free or all slavery. Lincoln lost the election for senator to Stephen Douglas, but his speech and campaign made him a leader of the Republican Party. More, it created the perfect presidential candidate in the 1860 election. The party would offer a platform of anti-slavery and support big business. Perhaps an indication of how broken the country was at the time, 4 different parties offered candidates for the presidency in 1860. It wasn't a pretty campaign. Lincoln's opponents made fun of his appearance. One political cartoon showed Lincoln being carried on a rail by a black man, who referred to himself with the N-word and Lincoln as Old Massa Abe. When the smoke had cleared, Abraham Lincoln won over Northern Democrat, Southern Democrat, and Constitutional Union contenders. But Lincoln was not yet in office when South Carolina left the Union in late 1860. 6 more Southern states joined the Confederacy by the time of his inauguration. The total would soon reach 11 states. About a month after the inauguration, on April 12, 1861, Confederate soldiers attacked Fort Sumter. It was a federal facility in South Carolina, and it fell to Southern soldiers in less than 2 days. The American Civil War had begun. Still, the president managed to sign the Homestead Act of 1862. It gave thousands of citizens the chance to move west to build a home on property of their own. But Lincoln had a single focus, more important than any other issue that might come up during his service as president. The war must come to an end as quickly as possible. Jefferson Davis, a hero of the Mexican-American War and former member of the U.S. Senate, was chosen as President of the Confederate States. Leading the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia was General Robert E. Lee. The General-in-Chief for the Union Army of the Potomac was Winfield Scott. Scott's strategy for success was called the Anaconda Plan. Like a long snake, Union warships would choke off all southern water ports. This would hurt the South's economy, as no cotton could be exported and needed resources could not be imported. Lincoln had some doubts about the Anaconda Plan. Soon he ordered Union ground troops to invade the South. Abe also had some questions about his slow-to-react General Winfield Scott. He was soon replaced by General George McClellan, who then was soon replaced by General Henry Halleck. Neither left Lincoln with a feeling of confidence. The President then turned to General Ulysses S. Grant in March of 1864. Graduating in the lower half of his class at West Point Military Academy, Grant was nevertheless a respected horseman. More, he sparked a winning Union strategy that led to Lee and the South surrendering at Appomattox Courthouse 1 year later. Another result of the ongoing Civil War involved many slave rebellions in the South. Even though the South had separated from the United States, Lincoln still held command over the entire nation. He announced the Emancipation Proclamation. It said that, on January 1, 1863, all slaves in rebelling states would be free forever. Black men would also be accepted in the Union Army, further strengthening the Northern forces. More, Lincoln later supported passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in America. Among the many bloody battles during the war was Gettysburg, a small town in Pennsylvania. In the first 3 days of July in 1863, more than 10,000 soldiers from the North and South were killed. 30,000 were wounded, and another 10,000 were missing or taken prisoner. More than 30,000 dead and wounded soldiers were left on the battlefields of Gettysburg. 4 months later, the Soldiers' National Cemetery was dedicated at Gettysburg. It was the final resting place for thousands of Union soldiers, with thousands of Confederate soldiers relocated to cemeteries in the South after the war. President Lincoln addressed the crowd of 15,000 for just 2 minutes.
77 years ago, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Many considered the Battle of Gettysburg to be the turning point of the Civil War. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address hoped that the outcome of the war would secure the ideas of freedom and equality in the United States. Lincoln looked to his cabinet for advice throughout the conflict. He had selected several former rivals. Salmon P. Chase was his Secretary of the Treasury, and William Seward was Secretary of State. EDWIN Stanton was Secretary of War for most of Lincoln's presidency. Despite much friction among them, these men respected each other. They knew working together was the only way to properly deal with the Civil War. Lincoln was reelected in 1864. With Lee's surrender to Grant, the Civil War came to an end. The president could focus on rebuilding the country as a whole. 5 days after the surrender, Abe and his wife Mary visited Ford's Theater in the nation's capital. The show was a comedy, Our American Cousin. Suddenly, a shot rang from the president's balcony box. John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Southern sympathizer, had fired a pistol into the back of Lincoln's head. He died the next morning. It was the first assassination of an American president. The nation had been celebrating the war's end. Unexpectedly, they were thrown into a state of mourning. President Lincoln was gone, but his efforts to mend the country would not be forgotten. Today, Abe appears on the penny coin and the $5 bill, as well as Mount Rushmore. In Washington, the Lincoln Memorial is a lasting tribute to his leadership. As for Lincoln's killer, Booth jumped onto the stage from the president's box in the balcony, breaking his right leg. Still, he escaped the theater. A hunted man for 11 days, he was cornered in a Virginia tobacco barn. Refusing to surrender, Booth was surrounded by about 100 Union soldiers and was shot dead. For more than 80 years, the argument raged between the strength of the individual states and the power of the federal government. Thanks in large part to Lincoln, the outcome of the Civil War proved that the sum of the country was more essential than the issues of the separate states. To recap, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States, serving more than one term between 1861 and 1865. A simple lawyer from Illinois, his House-divided speech as U.S. Senator warned of the approaching Civil War. He worked to reunite the country during that terrible conflict before being killed by a bullet from an assassin's gun.